Today, I bring you a speech that will strike something deep inside you. A speech that will make you question the way you've been living, the way you've been begging, for love, for respect, for validation. Because let me tell you this, the moment a man stops begging, the moment he refuses to crawl on his knees for what he deserves, is the moment his real power begins to rise. Think about it. How many times have you lowered your head, not out of humility, but out of desperation? How many times have you stretched out your hands to someone, hoping they'd give you attention, affection, or approval, only to be left empty? The truth is, every man at some point learns the sting of begging, and every man, if he chooses to rise, learns the freedom of refusing to beg. The world is cruel to weak men. It punishes those who beg for what should already be theirs. A man who begs is not respected. He is tolerated at best and humiliated at worst. But the man who stands tall, even in silence, even in rejection, even in pain, he is the one the world begins to notice. Because strength is not shown in how much you can plead for something, it is shown in how much you can walk away from. There is a hidden power that awakens the moment you stop begging. It's not loud, it's not desperate, it's not even visible at first. But it changes everything about you. It changes how you walk, how you talk, how you think. Because when you start begging, you start building. When you stop pleading for scraps, you start preparing for feasts. When you stop lowering yourself for others, you begin to rise for yourself. But let me take you deeper. Begging isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's not about dropping to your knees. Sometimes it's in the small compromises you make. You beg for love by accepting less than loyalty. You beg for respect by staying silent when they disrespect you. You beg for acceptance by playing small, hiding your real self, just so others will let you stay in their circle. That too is begging. And every time you do it, you kill a little piece of your soul. And here's the brutal truth: no one gives you back those pieces. No one restores the dignity you throw away. Only you can do that, and the only way to do it is to refuse to beg. Picture this: a man standing alone, broken, rejected, laughed at. Everyone has turned away. He has two choices: to crawl back, beg for them to return, beg for another chance, beg to be seen, or to rise in silence, to refuse the humiliation, to build himself brick by brick without asking anyone for permission. Which man do you think becomes unstoppable? Which man do you think the world can no longer ignore? You see, the ones who laughed at you, who left you, who rejected you, they never expected you to rise. They expected you to stay small. They expected you to keep begging. And that's why the greatest revenge, the most dangerous power, is to refuse. Refuse to kneel. Refuse to crawl. Refuse to let their validation define you. The hidden power is not in words. It's in action. It's in silence. It's in walking away when your pride is on the line. It's in choosing yourself over their approval. And once you master this, once you stop begging, something shifts inside you forever. Men are not born dangerous. They are forged dangerous when life strips everything away and they refuse to crawl back. Men are not born respected. They earn respect when they demand it, not with words, but with their refusal to tolerate less. And men are not born powerful. They become powerful the moment they understand they never had to beg in the first place. So listen to me. If you're on your knees right now, begging for love that isn't loyal, begging for respect that isn't given, begging for opportunities that aren't yours, stand up. Not tomorrow, not someday, right now. Because every second you spend begging is a second you lose building. There is a silence that terrifies the world, the silence of a man who refuses to beg. Because that silence speaks louder than words. That silence says, I don't need you. I don't need your approval. I don't need your crumbs. I will build my own table. I will write my own destiny. And when I rise, it won't be because of you. It will be in spite of you. The moment a man refuses to beg, the world shifts. He doesn't even realize it at first. It's like a switch that flips silently inside him. No thunder, no applause, no cheering crowd. Just a quiet decision. A quiet voice that whispers, and never again. And that whisper is more powerful than 1,000 shouts. When you stop begging, you suddenly feel the weight you've been carrying fall off your shoulders. You realize that all along, the chains weren't on your hands. They were on your mind. You were enslaved by your own need for approval. You thought you needed them. You thought you couldn't live without their love, their respect, their validation. But the second you refuse to beg, you find out you never needed them at all. That realization is the turning point. That's where the transformation begins. Because when you're no longer begging, you're free to build. And building from zero, building from nothing, is what separates weak men from unstoppable men. The man who once crawled now stands. He looks at the empty room around him. No applause, no cheering, no helping hands. Just silence. And in that silence, he makes his choice to turn his pain into power, to turn rejection into focus, to turn loneliness into discipline. Think about it. A man who is full, who is surrounded by comfort, by applause, by validation, he doesn't change. Why would he? Comfort kills growth. But a man stripped bare, a man with nothing left, a man who refuses to beg, he has no choice but to rise. That's where the most dangerous transformation begins. Day after day, he works in silence, not to prove them wrong, at least not at first, but to prove himself right. He sharpens his mind. He strengthens his body. He builds habits, discipline, resilience. He cuts away distractions, addictions, weaknesses. Piece by piece, brick by brick, he rebuilds himself, not as who he was, but as who he was meant to be. And here's the secret. Silence becomes his ally. Because when you beg, you're loud. You're shouting for attention, for approval. But when you stop begging, you stop shouting. You start listening. Listening to the voice inside you. Listening to the lessons pain is teaching you. Listening to the discipline that whispers, keep going, keep building, keep rising. The world doesn't notice right away. At first, they laugh at your silence. They mistake it for weakness. They think you've given up. But that's where the transformation becomes lethal. Because you're growing where no one is looking. You're planting seeds in the dark that will one day break the ground and shock everyone. And let me tell you something, nothing is more dangerous than a man who grows in silence, because when he finally emerges, he's not the same broken man who once begged. He's sharper, stronger, ruthless, unstoppable. The man who begged for love now learns to love himself. The man who begged for respect now commands it without words. The man who begged for opportunities now creates them with his own two hands. This is the part the world never sees, the grind, the nights alone, the tears no one notices, the sacrifices no one applauds. But it's in those unseen battles that men are remade. That's where the hidden power takes form. Every day he asks himself, do I crawl back, or do I rise higher? And every day he chooses higher, slowly at first, small steps, small victories, a little more strength, a little more clarity, a little more self-respect. Until one day, without realizing it, he has risen far above where he ever was. The man who refuses to beg develops a fire inside that no one can extinguish. He doesn't chase anymore. He attracts. He doesn't plead anymore. He commands. He doesn't depend anymore. He leads. And here's the thing, this transformation isn't fueled by anger alone. Anger may ignite it, but discipline sustains it. Because many men get angry, many men say, never again. But only the ones who build in silence, who remain consistent, who refuse to break even when no one is watching, those are the ones who transform into something untouchable. The hidden power grows slowly, but once it's there, it cannot be ignored. People begin to notice without you trying. They look at you differently. They wonder, what happened to him? He used to beg. He used to be desperate. He used to be weak. But now you walk differently. You carry yourself differently. You don't need their approval anymore. And that's exactly why they give it. It's ironic, isn't it? The moment you stop begging for love, love begins to seek you. The moment you stop begging for respect, respect begins to follow you. The moment you stop begging for opportunity, opportunity begins to knock. Because the world doesn't reward begging. It rewards power. It rewards strength. It rewards the man who stands tall when others crawl. But here's the dangerous part. Once a man learns this lesson, he can never be the same again. Because he's tasted freedom. Freedom from begging. Freedom from chains. Freedom from needing anyone else to complete him. And once you taste that freedom, you never go back. That is the true turning point. Not when you shout, not when you fight, not when you demand, but when you quietly refuse to beg. That's when the silent, ruthless transformation begins. That's when you begin to walk the path toward becoming untouchable. The man who rebuilds in silence doesn't just get stronger. He becomes a storm that doesn't announce itself, doesn't beg for attention. It just arrives. And when it does, nothing can stand in its way. So if you find yourself right now in silence, in rejection, in loneliness, don't see it as weakness. See it as the beginning. See it as your turning point. Because it's in the silence where men are rebuilt. It's in the silence where power is born. It's in the silence where the begging ends and the rising begins. And when you rise, the world won't even recognize you. They thought he would crawl back. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought refusal meant weakness. But they never understood what was truly being built in that quiet, relentless fire. A man who refuses to beg is not a man without needs. He is a man who discovered that every need can be transformed into strength. He starved, yet he fed on discipline. He ached, yet he found medicine in his own endurance. He lost people, yet gained a bond with his own soul so unbreakable that no betrayal could ever shatter it again. And now, he rises. Not loudly, not with the world clapping for him, but with a stillness so sharp, so immovable, that those who once pitied him can only watch in awe. Because the final stage of his transformation was never about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about shouting his worth. It was about building himself into someone who no longer cared to be accepted, because he had accepted himself completely. That is where the hidden power lies. That is where true freedom begins. He no longer begs for love, because he has love for himself. He no longer begs for attention, because he knows his silence speaks louder than any performance ever could. He no longer begs for approval, because his worth is no longer up for debate. And in this refusal, something unstoppable is born. You see, life tests men in two brutal ways. The first test is loss, when everything you thought you needed is taken away. The second test is temptation, when the world dangles acceptance, validation, and comfort in front of you, if only you will bend your knee. Most men pass the first test, but they break in the second. They stand strong in loss, but they fold when the world whispers, just beg, just ask, just give up your pride and we will feed you. And when they bow down, they never stand tall again. But the man who refuses to beg, he is different. He chooses the harder road. He chooses hunger over compromise, pain over dependency, solitude over false belonging. And the reward for that choice is something most men will never know. A soul that no one owns, a spirit that no one can manipulate, and a life that no one can control. That is why his transformation looks almost supernatural. He moves differently. He carries himself differently. There's no desperation in his eyes anymore, no subtle pleading in his posture. He doesn't chase, he doesn't cling, he doesn't fight for scraps at tables where he was never wanted. Instead, he builds his own table, sits at it alone, and in time, others find themselves drawn to the quiet authority he radiates. This is the paradox. The man who needed no one becomes the man everyone looks toward. The one who begged for nothing becomes the one people offer everything to. The one who chose solitude becomes the one whose presence is magnetic. And not because he asked for it, but precisely because he didn't. And let me tell you this truth, the man who refuses to beg learns the one lesson that can never be taken from him. The lesson that life bends to those who will not bend for it. Yes, there were nights he thought he would break. Yes, there were moments when silence felt heavier than steel chains. Yes, he could have taken the easy way, lowered his pride, begged for mercy, begged for comfort. But every time he stood firm, he was reforging himself. Every refusal was a hammer strike against the old man he used to be. Every silence was a sword sharpened. Every lonely day was weight added to his spine until it became unbreakable. So what happens now? What happens when a man comes out the other side of that crucible? He is no longer fragile. He is no longer desperate. He is no longer swayed by the promises of others, no longer manipulated by the fear of being left out. His strength is invisible to most, but undeniable to all. You see it in his eyes, that unshakable calm. You hear it in his voice, measured, steady, no need to prove. You feel it in his presence. He takes up space without trying, and people sense it. The same ones who once doubted him now wonder how he became untouchable. The same ones who once withheld from him now seek his company. The same ones who once saw him as weak now whisper his name with respect. But here's the deeper truth. He doesn't need any of it. He doesn't crave their respect, their admiration, or their approval. He lives now for something greater, for the quiet dignity of knowing he refused to bow, and because of that, he owns himself completely. That is the hidden power no one tells you about. It's not loud, it's not glamorous, it's not about riches or applause. It's about walking through the world with the knowledge that nothing can enslave you anymore. Not rejection, not loneliness, not loss, not temptation. You've been through all of it, and you refuse to beg, so what can touch you now? This is why the man who refuses to beg becomes unstoppable. Because once you no longer fear the emptiness of being alone, you cannot be manipulated. Once you no longer hunger for scraps of validation, you cannot be controlled. Once you no longer plead for love, you can finally give love freely, because it is no longer a transaction, it is an overflow. And the greatest lesson of all, he learns that true power does not come from taking control of others, it comes from taking control of himself. It comes from the ability to look in the mirror and say, even if no one stands beside me, I will still stand. That is the essence of masculinity at its peak. That is the mark of a man who is free. So if you are listening to this, and you are tempted to beg, for her to stay, for them to notice, for life to finally hand you a piece of mercy, remember this man's story. Remember the nights he sat in silence and chose dignity over desperation. Remember the mornings he rose without applause, without comfort, without anyone to soften the blow, and he kept moving anyway. Remember that he built himself not through what he gained, but through what he refused to take. One day, you too will stand in that same quiet strength. One day, you too will look back at the world that thought you were weak, and you will realize that the moment you stopped begging was the moment you became free. One day, you too will understand that the hidden power is not something you are given, but something you choose. So choose it. Refuse to beg. Stand in silence, and let your life be proof that the man who chooses his dignity over his desperation is the man no one can break. Because when the world sees you walking with that untouchable calm, they won't remember the days you were hungry, or lonely, or bleeding inside. They will only see the man who rose. They will only see the man who refused. They will only see the man who became unstoppable. And that is the power they never wanted you to find.